TMF Daily enthusiasts. Today we're talking about the trial master file at the site level from a site owner's perspective. The guest I have today will share with us how she started her clinical research career as a study coordinator and eventually became a site owner for as little as $200. TMF Elite, let's learn the site TMF, the AKA, the Investigator Site File from a site owner. LaToya, welcome to the TMF Daily Podcast.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good.
So, LaToya, I love that you were a medical assistant, just like myself, and got into clinical research. And then your first job was a CRC. Can you just share with us, how did you learn the Investigator Site File, also known as the Reg Binder? What kind of training was involved? Or were you just thrown into it like most of us?
So actually, because I'm a medical assistant by trade, that's how I was able to get the coordinator position. But I have a master's in public health. So again, that's how I got the position. So my clinical skills and my education, where the site owner who I worked for felt that I had the clinical background from being a medical assistant, but I had the educational background where I can figure out all of the regulatory and the trial master file and all that stuff. But no, I had no formal training, was thrown into it. I worked at a small research site. I was the only coordinator. The doctor would come in on, just whenever we had patients. But during the day, I was there by myself and just had to figure out some things.
Wow. That's wild. So you probably wore a lot of different hats.
I did.
Learned a ton. And so you just got thrown right into it.
Yes.
Looking at a 1572, how'd you know it was filled out correctly?
I did not. So I tell people all the time, I made so many errors and so many mistakes, and my CRAs are the ones who trained me.
Mm-hmm. So, I hear that a lot.
Yep. They would tell me, no, this is done incorrectly. Go back and do this. So literally going back and forth, emails, calls, and saying, need to make this change. But that's how I learned.
That's how you learn, from making the mistakes, and then you figure it out and you're like, I'm not going to do that again.
Yes.
So I just want to jump right into this. How did you open up your site for $200?
So a lot of people feel that you need so much money and I need to open up a site and I have to do this and I have to have an actual location. But I wouldn't recommend anyone to have an actual location, especially if you've never been in the industry, you don't have any connections with any studies, and some people open up sites and don't even have doctors. So what I did was, my main thing was making sure that my business aspect was okay. So registering with the IRS and then the state, that was one thing. So that was a cost. But going to GoDaddy, to having a domain, I didn't want to communicate with any sponsors with a Gmail account because I didn't think that that was official. So the first thing I did was went to GoDaddy and got an official email address. And then that way I was able to communicate with the sponsors, but then also communicate with doctors, because who wants to communicate with a person and say, hey, let me run these clinical trials in your office. I know I have a Gmail account. I know I'm not official, but trust me, I know what I'm doing.
Right. There's got to be that professionalism to it.
Yeah. So first starting my GoDaddy account, having my email account, and then started contacting different physicians and seeing if they were interested. So I wanted to make sure I had a doctor first. So the idea was, of course, embedding myself into a doctor's office. If I'm bringing the doctor money, of course, they're not going to charge me to be in their space because I'm bringing them money. And so it was all about, I can do this. I can bring you trials. I can get you into this space. Just let me have space in your office. You don't have to worry about giving me any supplies. I'll provide my own supplies. So I didn't purchase anything like any refrigerator, blood pressure cup, anything until I got my first site visit.
Well, didn't they already have everything at the doctor's office?
So I wanted to keep some things separate.
Okay.
And some things, like I didn't want to have refrigerated IP or have to freeze the samples and mix it with their samples. So some things I wanted to keep completely separate. And especially having my own space. Like when we have our site visit, I want to say, this is research. This is for research. This is separate from the doctors. This is how I know, especially if it's refrigerated IP. I want to be able to say it's behind a locked door. This is ours. This is where the files will be, in this room. So I made sure that the room looked nice. Although the doctor's office did have some things, exam tables, paper, things of that nature. But yeah, I didn't spend a whole lot. So I didn't start spending money until, and even still, it wasn't until I got the study, because once we did the site qualification visit, I was just walking them through it and say, oh, we're going to purchase a refrigerator. Oh, we're going to get that. And once we were awarded the study, it was like, okay, now I can spend this money on the things that we need.
Got it. All right. That makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about the budgets, especially regarding like your TMF. Do you tend to get like some pushback from the sponsors in that TMF section?
Absolutely. We definitely get a lot of pushback for IRB submission. They're like, oh, well, we're using central IRB. You don't need a budget for that. And I'm like, okay, well, are you going to do the submission? Are you going to get the paperwork together to do the submission and do the back and forth if anything is needed? So sometimes a lot of sponsors feel that if a central IRB is being used, that they don't have to compensate us for that. And I'm like, no. So what I did was, if I get any pushback, I have a SOP created that spells out exactly why we're requesting these funds for utilizing a central IRB.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm going to get a little off topic here. So when you started your new site, did you have to create a ton of SOPs?
What I will say is that over the course of my career, I've worked for different sites that needed SOPs. So if I created that SOP, that's my work. I put the work into that was my ideas. Those are my words. So a lot of SOPs I kept along the years. And when it was time for my site, I just compiled it and made it special for Chicago, special for Houston, because certain things like storage of documents offsite, anything that has to be destroyed, if I'm using SteriCycle or whatever, those things are custom to the site. But a lot of the SOPs, I just, pretty much have standard across both sites.
So are we looking at like 20, 30, 50, 100?
I have a good 25 SOPs.
All right. That's pretty good. So when you are coordinating with your team and investigators and you're trying to get that necessary documents and signatures, how are you doing that?
So it depends, because Chicago is way easier because I'm here and I'm regulatory for both sites. So what I'll do is basically get all the documents together, make sure they are correct, and then make sure I have it together for when my PI is on site, have her sign it. The most troublesome thing about any regulatory documents is writing the date correctly. That is so nerve-wracking. Like, everything could be correct. Oh, can you have them line through an initial? The date is wrong. But that part is irritating. But again, for the Houston site as well, getting the documents together, emailing them to my coordinator, and then having the PI sign off on it.
Got it. Yes. For those who don't know, LaToya has 2 sites, one in Houston and one in Chicago. And she does the regulatory for both sites.
Yeah.
Now, how do you manage that remotely when you're trying to get that PI signature over in Houston? Because it's not like you're sitting there waiting for him to get done seeing a patient, being like, can you sign this document real quick before you see the next one?
Yeah, but no, just having my coordinator do it. So I'll just create all the documents, have everything in one folder, say print this off, get it signed, and scan it back to me. I generally do not use DocuSign because a lot of the documents need wedding signatures. So only if the sponsors say, I need this right now, can you have her DocuSign? Am I okay with that? But other than that, we do wedding.
Okay. But you have the capability to do DocuSign.
Yes.
Was that hard to validate?
No.
It's pretty easy process, because some people are always scared to do those digital signatures.
Yeah, it just depends on the platform. So when you go through actual DocuSign, they make sure that everything is certified and legit. I don't know how everything is. It's a lot of off-brand platforms that's being used right now, but I just go to the original source. DocuSign is perfectly fine. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's less headache than the other platforms.
So what are some of the primary challenges you face in managing the Investigator Site File remotely?
The most challenging thing is making sure that the documents are actually in the binder. So even though my coordinator will scan and send it back to me, so I know that it was done, is making sure that it was filed away properly. So when I go to the site, I'll go and review and make sure that everything is there. But it's like, if it's not, we had a site visit, I want to say in March, and could not find one of the documents that I had her sign.
The original one.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, where is it? So we're looking. It ended up being in another regulatory binder, but it was there. But that's the challenge, that if I'm not doing it myself or a trained regulatory person.
Mm-hmm. But you still have that scanned copy in case, for whatever reason,
So that's the
you
thing. I
can't
keep
locate.
everything. Everything is backed up, and I have the digital copies.
Mm-hmm. So how often are you going on site to like review the like paper binder?
I would say about it 3 times a year. Before, I was in Houston every month,
Oh
but
my
now it's
God.
been about 3 times a year.
Wow. Every month. You must have got like burnt out pretty quick from doing that, right?
I didn't get burnout because I had friends there and I really enjoyed being there. And the food is
Right.
amazing in Houston. So I didn't mind. And I racked up a lot of frequent flyer miles, a ton. I had a lot of free flights and now I miss it.
So can you share with us like the backup person? Like generally in clinical research, it's really important to have a backup. So let's talk about the importance of that at the site.
So the importance of a backup person is if the original isn't there or if something happens or if they quit. And we've had that happen in the past. We had a person just leave. So luckily for me, my really good friend who I trained myself in Chicago moved to Houston, and she's actually my first coordinator in Houston. And she moved on to something else now, but she's my backup person if I need anything. If my person quit and I need to put her on a delegation log, like she knows what to do and she knows how to draw blood. So she's the all around coordinator. She can do everything. So if there's ever an emergency and I have to have like, look, I need you. If only you could see the patients on the weekend until I hire somebody full time, like she's there.
Can she draw blood?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
That's always like the number one scare. Like,
Yes.
we need someone to draw the blood.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on like, or maybe you've experienced this where the PI only wants to be listed and not have any sub-investigators listed?
Well, we've had cases where we didn't have a lot of options as far as sub-investigator because we didn't have, again, with working with minority physicians and targeting minority communities, it's still one of those things like, okay, what am I getting myself into? Am I signing this contract? Will I be liable? So in the beginning, it was kind of difficult to find a sub-investigator, but now we have a nurse practitioner who's like, amazing, really on board with research, talks about research all the time in her personal circles. So I haven't come across a PI that say, I don't want a sub-investigator, but this is the great thing about owning this company. It's okay, this is the direction that I want to go in. So I am saying this is our sub-investigator. So I'll originally, like for this, especially Chicago, I'll ask the doctor if she has a friend or somebody that she's more comfortable with that would like to be the sub-investigator. If not, we always, I have nurse practitioners. I have resumes just sitting here for people waiting for opportunities, but definitely saying, okay, this is the direction I want for my company. We have a PI and then I need that backup person for when my PI isn't available because she's not always available, especially to do exams. So she's always available to sign up on labs and review the labs, but to actually be physically present when I have a swarm of patients that want to come in. And my nurse practitioner is like, oh, I'm free this Saturday. So it's like, that's the go-to.
Very convenient.
Yes.
So for individuals who are currently study coordinators, like what kind of career paths can they go on to? We know you can definitely be a site owner, but what are some other options?
So one thing that always irritated me is like everybody wants to be a CRA.
Mm-hmm.
Like, CRA, I'm like, is that all you know? But in all honesty, for people, especially people that are in the research industry, they may meet a CRA and here I get to travel, I do this, I do that. And it's like, just me personally, that was like my least favorite that I wanted to do. I didn't want the travel part of it. And I didn't want the stress of it. In all honesty, just anything with the sponsor didn't appeal to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
I really like being at the site level and being able to visibly see the difference that I'm making. And so it was like, okay, I don't want to be a coordinator forever. So being a site manager was one of the things. So it's regulatory manager, site manager. I've worked different site level positions and also site level positions at universities, which was terrible as well. But being at the site level is definitely the route for me. But everybody doesn't want that. So I definitely go through and say, the different positions within pharma, project management, the trial master files, all that stuff. So it's like, and even recruiting is always an option as well. But I just like for people just to actually know the process. If you know the process of drug production and the behind the scenes, then you have a better understanding and then figuring out what your niche might be.
Mm-hmm. Like at your site, do you have like a patient recruitment specialist?
I do.
You
And
do.
she actually lives in Atlanta.
Is that right? So
Yeah.
how does that work?
Like, let's say I go to a lot of health fairs or do a lot of advertising, and a couple of our studies had central ad campaigns. So she would just have access to all the participants who needed follow-up, and she'll call and screen and see if they qualify and does the follow-up, put their appointments in. And then we use a CTMS so they get an automatic reminder. But if they need to reschedule, she's the first line of contact.
I love that. I feel like that role's such a hot ticket and people don't talk about it enough because if there's not patients, there's no studies.
Yeah.
And like if you can market yourself and get
Yeah.
patients for studies, that
Yeah.
makes you so desirable in this industry.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So can you just share with us maybe like what technology or softwares that you use to maintain and update the investigator site file?
So right now, we just utilize like a Google Drive just to hold
Mm-hmm.
everything there because we do have real time and they do have capabilities of storing all of our regulatory and startup documents, but my brain isn't there yet. It's a lot to be able to utilize these platforms to store everything. I'm getting there. And I would say by the end of the year, we will be 100% electronic. We have used a couple of other platforms where we were storing our regulatory. And again, sometimes if the sponsor doesn't send everything electronically, like I did work a Pfizer trial and they sent over a large file that we were able to upload into the electronic regulatory platform that we were using. And literally all we had to do was just plug in our documents. It was literally like the big binder, but in digital form. But a lot of sponsors are still sending paper binders where, all right, we got to do everything paper. We have to print this up. We have to get wet signature. We have to put it in the actual binder. But the Pfizer study was pretty nice. But again, it's a learning curve where you have to get your brain wrapped around using this platform every single time and storing your documents in there every single time because you said you were going to use everything electronic. So you have to do that. But the other thing is, again, with using a CTMS and going from paper to CTMS, it's a learning curve where you have to train your brain to use this system every time. Because again, when I was a coordinator, everything was on paper. It's easy to just have paper and I can just write it down and the visits are going by so much faster. But I never even introduced my coordinators to paper. I want them to be better than me. So everything is electronic. We do go through real time and they don't even know what a paper source looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What about you when you were a medical assistant? Were you guys using like paper charts or were they electronic?
So that was 100 years ago. So it was only paper charting back then. And I will say while I was in the midst of my medical assistant career, we did switch over to an EMR and we had to take each paper chart and scan it one by one into the patient's chart, electronic chart.
Mm-hmm. Yep. When I was a medical assistant, I started off with electronic. And then when I wanted to switch to a different office, they used paper. And I was like, oh no, I can't go back. Like I've already started electronic. Like I couldn't imagine going to paper.
Yeah.
It just like my brain wasn't going to be wired that way.
Yeah. And see, that's exactly why I never introduced my coordinators to paper. Because I didn't want them to get comfortable and say, this is what we're going to do. It's like, no.
Yep. So when you're working remotely, like how do you handle the audits or the inspections of your investigator site file?
So I'm available whenever there's a monitoring visit. I'm available remotely. So we can hop on a Zoom call if needed. If they can't find something or if I need to create a document, a note to file right away, I can do it right while they're on site versus waiting. So I just make sure that even though I'm not there, my schedule is blocked out. So my time will be able to be devoted to what's needed at the site.
That makes perfect sense. I love technology and how we can just be available virtually,
Yeah.
anytime, anywhere, any place. We're like 911 speed dial.
Yes.
So you and I were talking earlier about how you went to a Beyonce concert and eventually got a grant from her. Can you just share with us like what that was like?
Yes, so it was actually a grant that it was for a luncheon. It was like Beyonce's giving away $10,000 and it's going to be a luncheon. I'm like, oh wow, that's great. A friend of mine sent it to me, and it was for minority-owned businesses, and she was doing this for 10 of the cities during her Renaissance tour last year. And I filled out the application. That it was extensive, like they were asking a lot of questions, and I'm like, but it's Beyonce, I have to fill it out. And the website just kept crashing. So I remember one night I got up, it was probably like 1 o'clock in the morning, so that I can complete it. I completed it, and I want to say maybe 2 months later, they sent a letter saying I was invited to the luncheon. I had completely forgot about the money. So I'm excited to go to the luncheon. So I'm shopping for dresses so I can be cute for the luncheon. And while we were there, I'm like, oh yes, they are giving away money. And in my mind, the first thing I was like, I'm not going to get it. It's like 100 businesses here. I know everybody's doing amazing things. But then the other side of my brain said, I've been working really hard for this site. I'm doing something that not a lot of people are doing, and not a lot of people even have access to. And I said, if nobody is deserving in this room, I am.
Mm-hmm.
And they called my name for, I was one of 10 businesses
Wow.
that got the grant for Chicago.
That is amazing. Like you don't hear that every day.
Yeah. So I tell people all the time, if Beyonce thinks I'm amazing, I'm amazing.
You are amazing. Definitely. No doubt in our minds. And so what did you use the 10 grand for?
I used it to buy floors. So coincidentally, I want to say in June of last year, I had just got the keys for my Chicago research space, and it needed renovations like really bad. And during the midst of those renovations, and I was just piecing it together, again, I used my Houston office to fund what was needed for Chicago. And when I got the grant, I'm like, great, now I can get these floors that I really, really want. And so, yeah, I got the grant in July. And like I said, I had just got my keys in June. So the timing was so perfect.
The stars were aligning for you.
Yeah.
That was amazing. It just worked right out.
Yes.
Wow. So I always end my show with 2 questions that I like to ask my guests. The first one is, what's the best career advice that you've ever received, and who was it by?
So what's really crazy, and I've been thinking about that for a while, and what's really, really, really sad is that I cannot recall ever receiving any career advice for research. When I got into this space, by chance because I was a medical assistant and because I had a master's. So that's like, oh, this person would be a perfect fit. But it was nobody guiding me saying, you should get into clinical research because I think you would be great. And even when I got into clinical research, no one guided me and said, I think that you would be great for this position. You should go for it. Literally nobody. And because of that is why I mentor a lot of other people when they consider doing research, when they want to be site owners. I actually have a site ownership masterclass where I speak to other people about how do you get into this space? Because even when I did ask questions about how I could start my own site, I was always faced with the questions, well, why do you want to do that? And I didn't receive any help. I didn't receive any guidance from anybody. Like everything that I've done has been trial and error and figuring it out for myself. But the greatest advice that I've gotten career-wise as a whole was from my dad. And he always told me from the beginning to get into healthcare, get into medical, because people are always going to be sick and people are always going to die. And he was like, he was so blunt. And he was like, get into healthcare. He was like, because if you're in healthcare, you'll never be without a job.
Mm-hmm.
And he always taught me that. And then just being nurturing and saying, you can do this. You know, it was never any limits to anything ever. So it was like, if I wanted to have the moon and the stars, you can go for it. But yeah, just that supportive role and telling me that I can do pretty much anything.
All right. And what is your favorite TMF document and why?
So I would say my favorite document is the 1572. Because when I first started in research, that was the document that was the hardest for me. Like I wasn't understanding, why do I have to keep sending this back? Well, why isn't this on there? But now being a more seasoned researcher, understanding the importance of the 1572, because that's almost like outside of the protocol, that's the second Bible, where it's telling you exactly what the study is, who's conducting the study, who's up under the study, like who can work on the study with the doctor, exactly where the research is being done, what's the IRB, if there's a lab, like if there's an external vendor for any imaging, like that thing is going to tell you everything. Like you don't have to go searching for where is this going to be done, which vendor is for the, literally the 1572, those 3 to 4 pages is going to tell you exactly what you need. And that's why that's my favorite.
Well, LaToya, thank you so much for joining us on the TMF Daily Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.